I never expected to find the manuscript that would tear my family apart while cleaning out Dad's study. But there it was, tucked between dusty physics journals and Mom's neuroscience papers, a story I wrote when I was 12, covered in my mother's red ink. My name is Riley, and I used to think being different was my biggest problem. Turns out it was just the beginning. What are you doing in here? Mom's sharp voice made me jump. I clutched the wrinkled pages to my chest, feeling like I'd been caught stealing rather than cleaning. Just organizing Dad's books before the department dinner, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Found something interesting, though. Mom's eyes narrowed when she spotted the manuscript in my hands. Oh, that old thing. I meant to dispose of it years ago. The casual dismissal in her voice felt like a slap. I opened the pages, my childhood imagination marked up like a failed exam. You wrote that my story showed concerning priorities and was a waste of intellectual potential. My voice cracked. I was 12. Riley, dear, we've been through this. Mom perched on Dad's leather chair, assuming her lecture pose. The Thompson name carries certain expectations. Your sister Emily understood this by your age. She was already publishing research papers in junior journals. Right, because God forbid a Thompson do anything but science. I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. Heaven help us if one of us actually wanted to create something different. Don't be dramatic. Mom stood, smoothing her blazer. We simply wanted to guide you toward more productive pursuits. Now, please finish organizing these books. The Whitakers will be here in an hour, and Charles is particularly interested in Emily's new research proposal. Of course he was. Dr. Charles Whitaker, the family friend who'd been hovering around our academic achievements like a vulture since before I was born. He'd probably wet himself with excitement over Emily's latest brilliant paper. I waited until Mom's heels clicked down the hallway before slumping into Dad's chair. The manuscript trembled in my hands as I flipped through more pages. Each red mark felt like a fresh wound.
Lex scientific merit.
Unrealistic premise. Consider focusing on observable phenomena instead of fantasy. My phone buzzed, a text from Mrs. Collins next door. Tea's ready when you need it, dear. Made those shortbread cookies you like. I smiled despite myself. Mrs. Collins, my elderly neighbor, had been more supportive of my writing than my entire family combined. She actually read my stories without trying to turn them into research papers. The sound of the front door opening echoed through the house, followed by Emily's voice. Mom? Dad? The prototype results came back early. I shoved the manuscript into my bag. No way was I sitting through another round of Emily the Prodigy tonight. As I headed for the door, a folder fell from Dad's desk. Papers scattered across the floor, and one caught my eye, an email printout from Dr. Whitaker to my parents. Regarding Riley's future prospects, concerns about maintaining the Thompson legacy, suggest redirecting her interests. Emily's continued success crucial to our plans. My hands shook as I read. They'd been planning my life behind my back, trying to force me into their perfect academic mold. And Dr. Whitaker, that smug bastard, was pulling strings I never even knew existed. I stuffed the email into my bag with the manuscript. Footsteps approached the study. Emily's excited chatter, Mom's proud responses, Dad's measured praise. I slipped out the side door before they could see me. Mrs. Collins was waiting on her porch with tea and understanding eyes. Rough day, dear. You could say that. I clutched my bag tighter, feeling the weight of my childhood dreams and their betrayal inside it. I think it's time I showed them exactly what a waste of intellectual potential can do. The sun was setting behind the university buildings, casting long shadows across our perfectly manicured lawn. In the growing darkness, I began to plan. The next morning, I found Emily in her home lab, hunched over a microscope like it held the secrets to the universe. Maybe for her, it did. I clutched my proposal in sweaty hands, trying to ignore the familiar sting of walking into her perfectly organized workspace.
Gotcha minuti.
I asked, forcing cheerfulness into my voice. She didn't look up. Make it quick. I'm tracking cellular degradation patterns. Of course she was. I perched on a stool, unfolding my sketches. Remember how we used to make those science comics when we were kids? I had this idea. We could collaborate on an educational graphic novel. Make complex research accessible to everyone. The microscope's light clicked off. Emily finally turned, her expression a perfect mirror of Mom's disapproval. Riley, I have a breakthrough paper due next month. Dr. Whitaker is presenting it at the International Symposium. Right, because heaven forbid science be fun or accessible, I muttered, crumpling my sketches. Not everything needs to be turned into a story. Emily's voice softened with that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. Maybe you should focus on something more substantial. The word hung between us like poison. I stood, my chair scraping against the floor. You know what? Forget it. Enjoy your cellular whatever. Riley, wait. Emily called after me, but I was already gone. I stormed into the kitchen, nearly colliding with Dad. He was absorbed in his tablet, probably reviewing another groundbreaking physics paper. Dad, the city's holding a storytelling competition next week, I blurted out. The theme is science and society. I thought maybe you and Mom. Oh, that's nice, dear. He didn't look up. Did you hear about Emily's prototype? Charles thinks it could revolutionize neural imaging. My throat tightened. Yeah, hard to miss when it's all anyone talks about. The doorbell rang before Dad could respond. Through the window, I spotted Mrs. Collins on our porch, holding what looked like old photographs. Riley, dear, she beamed as I opened the door. Look what I found while cleaning my attic. Your grandmother used to write for the university paper back in the day. Dad's head snapped up. Margaret's mother never wrote for. Oh, not your wife's mother, Mrs. Collins interrupted cheerfully. Your mother, Harold. Quite the storyteller she was. Won awards for her science fiction pieces. The silence in the kitchen turned thick enough to cut. Dad's face went pale, then red. Those were just hobby pieces. Nothing serious. Really? I snatched the yellowed newspaper clippings from Mrs. Collins' hands. Local writers' science fiction series challenges traditional academic boundaries. Sounds pretty serious to me. Dad practically lunged for his car keys. I have a department meeting. After he fled, Mrs. Collins patted my arm. Your grandmother would have loved your stories, dear. She never did fit their mold either. That evening, I sat in my room, staring at my competition entry form. The prize included publication in a major literary magazine. A chance to prove I wasn't just the family disappointment. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. About earlier. I'm sorry if I seem dismissive, but you know how important this research is.
I didn't respond.
Instead, I pulled out the email I'd found in Dad's study. There was more to it than I'd initially read. Riley's creative tendencies could pose a risk to the department's reputation. Best to redirect her before she draws unwanted attention. My hands shook as I signed the competition form. Let them ignore me. Let them dismiss me. I'd show them exactly what unwanted attention looked like. Through my window, I could see Emily's lab light still burning, her silhouette bent over that microscope. In Dad's study, Mom's voice carried faintly, probably another late-night call about Emily's brilliant future. I opened my laptop and began to write, my grandmother's rebellious spirit flowing through my fingers. They wanted to bury our creative legacy?
Fine.
I'd dig it up and wave it like a flag. The story poured out of me, a tale of family secrets and scientific arrogance. By morning, they'd see exactly what a Thompson's creativity could do. I wasn't meant to be in the university library that afternoon. But there I was, hiding behind a shelf of scientific journals, listening to Dr. Whitaker destroy what was left of my family's faith in me. The Thompson legacy is at a crucial juncture, his voice oozed through the stacks. Emily's work could secure the department's future for decades. But Riley, she's becoming a liability. Charles, she's still our daughter, Mom's voice wavered, surprising me. I'd never heard uncertainty in her tone before. Margaret, be reasonable. Your position on the board is precarious enough. Having one daughter rejecting everything we stand for, it raises questions about your influence. I peered through the gap between books. Mom sat rigid in her chair, while Dad stared out the window. Dr. Whitaker paced between them like a prosecutor delivering his closing argument. "We've arranged everything," he continued. "Emily's fellowship, her future position, the funding, it's all connected. We can't risk Riley's creative pursuits undermining our credibility." Dad finally spoke. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "Nothing dramatic. Just guidance. I have connections at several research institutions. Programs that could redirect her energy toward more appropriate pursuits." My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Mrs. Collins. "Found more of your grandmother's writings. You need to see these." I started to back away, but knocked a book off the shelf. It hit the floor with a damning thud. "Hello," Mom called out. "Is someone there?"
I ran.
Past students buried in textbooks, past Emily's favorite study spot, past years of trying to fit into their perfect academic world. I didn't stop until I reached Mrs. Collins' front porch. She opened the door before I could knock. "Perfect timing, dear. Look what else I found." She handed me a leather-bound journal. Inside, my grandmother's handwriting filled pages with stories, sketches, and something else designs. Beautiful, intricate drawings of sustainable housing concepts, decades ahead of their time. "She never published these," Mrs. Collins said softly. "Your grandfather thought they'd damage his reputation in the physics department." "Sound familiar?" My hands trembled as I turned the pages. "They're trying to send me away. To redirect me." "Are they now?" Mrs. Collins' eyes sparked with something fierce. "Well, perhaps it's time for some redirection of our own." She disappeared into her house, returning with a laptop. "Remember my grandson, Ethan? The environmental journalist? He's been looking for innovative sustainable design concepts for a feature piece." My grandmother's journals seemed to burn in my hands. "They want to bury me in some research program, make me disappear like they did to her. Or," Mrs. Collins smiled, "you could make yourself impossible to ignore." My phone buzzed again, "Emily. Where are you?" "Mom and Dad are acting weird." "Did something happen?" I ignored it, opening my grandmother's journal to a particularly stunning design. "Mrs. Collins, does Ethan still want that interview?" "He's in town next week, actually, covering the university's sustainability initiative." She paused, watching me carefully. "The same initiative Dr. Whitaker's been fighting against, if I recall correctly." Through her window, I could see my parents and Dr. Whitaker emerging from the library, heads bent in conversation. They looked like conspirators plotting a crime. In a way, they were. "I think," I said slowly, "it's time to show everyone what a Thompson woman can really do." Mrs. Collins squeezed my hand. "Your grandmother would be proud." I opened my laptop. My grandmother's designs spread out before me. They wanted to redirect me? Fine. I'd redirect myself right into the spotlight they were so desperate to avoid. "One more thing," Mrs. Collins added, her voice unusually serious. "There's something about your grandmother's departure from the university that you should know." But before she could continue, Emily appeared at the fence between our houses. "Riley, Mom and Dad want to talk to you. Something about your future." I met Mrs. Collins' eyes. We both knew what that conversation would entail. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of their plans for me. I had plans of my own. The eco-design firm's office felt like stepping into another world. No sterile lab coats or pretentious academic titles, just creative energy and the smell of recycled materials. I smoothed my shirt, clutching my portfolio filled with my grandmother's restored designs, updated for modern sustainability. "These are remarkable," Sarah, the creative director, said, spreading the drawings across her reclaimed wood desk. "The integration of solar technology with these vintage concepts, it's exactly what we're looking for." My phone buzzed, another missed call from Emily. I silenced it. "When can you start?"
Sarah asked.
Before I could answer, a familiar voice cut through the office. "Riley." Ethan Brooks stood in the doorway, camera bag slung over his shoulder. Mrs. Collins' grandson, the environmental journalist. Of course he'd be here. "You two know each other?" Sarah asked. "Not exactly," I managed, watching Ethan's eyes drift to my grandmother's designs. Wait, he said, moving closer. These look like… I've seen these before. In my grandmother's photos of… Your next article? I cut in, silently pleading with him to understand. About innovative sustainable design? He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly.
Right.
The article. My phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Mom. Dr. Whitaker has arranged an interview at the Neural Research Institute. Don't disappoint us again. When can you start? Sarah repeated. Tomorrow, I said firmly, ignoring the guilt churning in my stomach. Later, Ethan caught up with me in the parking lot. Those were your grandmother's designs, weren't they? The ones she never got to publish. I stopped walking. How much did Mrs. Collins tell you? Enough to know why you're here. He leaned against my car. But using her designs without credit. They drove her out of academia, I snapped. Made her bury her work because it didn't fit their precious scientific standards. Now they're trying to do the same to me. And your solution is to finish what she started. I pulled out the journal. Look at these notes. She wanted these designs used, wanted them to help people. The university buried them once. I won't let that happen again. Ethan was quiet for a moment. My article goes to print next week. If these designs are published under your name, then my family will finally see what they've been ignoring. I met his eyes. Unless you're planning to stop me? He handed back the journal. I'm planning to interview you about your innovative approach to sustainable design. Your grandmother's influence might come up naturally in the conversation. Relief flooded through me. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. He nodded toward the street, where Emily's car was pulling up. She got out, waving a familiar envelope. Riley, what is this? The Neural Institute called Mom about your missed interview. I'm not going, I said, instinctively stepping between her and my portfolio. This is your chance to fix things. Emily grabbed my arm. Dr. Whitaker pulled strings for you. No. He pulled strings to shut me up? I yanked away, just like they did to Dad's mother. Emily's face went blank. What are you talking about? Ask Dad about his mother's writing career. Ask him why all her designs were buried in university archives. I opened my car door. Better yet, ask Dr. Whitaker why he's so invested in controlling another generation of Thompson women. Riley, wait. But I was already driving away, leaving Emily standing next to Ethan in the parking lot. In my rearview mirror, I saw him hand her his business card. My phone lit up with a text from Sarah. Contract ready for tomorrow. Welcome to the team. I pulled over, hands shaking on the steering wheel. No turning back now. By this time next week, my family would either have to acknowledge my path or watch as I blazed it without them. Either way, I was done living in their shadow. The weekly Thompson family dinner felt like walking into an ambush. Mom had arranged the table with her best china, always a warning sign. Emily sat practically vibrating with excitement, while Dad kept checking his phone, a slight smile playing at his lips. I pushed my untouched food around the plate, waiting for whatever bomb they were about to drop. I have news, Emily announced, right on cue. The International Science Foundation selected my research proposal. Full funding, 3 years, with Dr. Whitaker as my mentor. Mom's eyes glistened. We're so proud, darling. Charles says this could lead to a permanent position at… I got a job too. I cut in, my voice steadier than I felt. Creative director at Ecovision Design. The silence that followed felt like a vacuum. Dad's fork clattered against his plate. That little sustainability startup? Mom's voice dripped with disdain. Riley, we've arranged everything with the Neural Institute. Dr. Whitaker has no right to arrange my life. I pulled out my grandmother's journal, just like he had no right to bury these designs 30 years ago. Dad's face went pale. Where did you get that? Does it matter? What matters is that your mother's work is finally going to see the light of day. You can't, Emily whispered, realization dawning. Riley, those designs aren't yours to… They're exactly mine to use, I shot back. Someone in this family has to carry on her legacy. Mom stood, her chair scraping against the floor. This ends now. You will call the Neural Institute tomorrow and accept their offer. Or… Or what? You'll bury me too. I opened the journal to a marked page. Did you know your precious Dr. Whitaker threatened to revoke Grandma's funding unless she stopped pursuing her frivolous creative endeavors? It's all right here in her notes. Dad reached for the journal. I yanked it away. I have copies, I said. And Ethan Brooks is running a story next week about innovative, sustainable design. Guess whose work will be featured? Ethan Brooks. Mom's voice sharpened. Charles mentioned him, that environmental journalist causing trouble for the university's development plans. The same plans that would destroy the wetlands Grandma tried to protect with these designs. I stood, my chair toppling backward. Funny how history repeats itself. Riley, Emily pleaded, think about what you're doing to the family. The family? I laughed, a harsh sound that surprised even me. You mean the family that's been suffocating me my entire life? The family that buried their own mother's dreams because they didn't fit the proper academic mold. That's enough. Dad slammed his hand on the table. You will not destroy everything we've built. The Neural Institute position starts Monday. Either you take it or you're no longer welcome in this house. The ultimatum hung in the air like poison gas. Emily's eyes darted between us, her perfect world cracking at the edges. Well, I said, my voice eerily calm. I guess that makes this easy. I walked to the door, Grandmother's journal clutched to my chest. Behind me, chairs scraped as my family rose. Riley, please, Mom called out. Think about your future. I turned back one last time. I am. For the first time, I really am. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Collins on her porch, watching. She gave me a slight nod as I walked to my car. My phone buzzed. Ethan. Story's ready. Sure you want to do this? I looked back at my family's house, where Emily stood in the doorway, her fellowship letter forgotten in her hand. Through the window, I could see Mom on the phone, probably calling Dr. Whitaker. Dad just stood there, looking lost, like he was seeing a ghost of his own mother walking away again. I typed back. Run it. Sometimes burning bridges lights the way forward. I started my car, my grandmother's journal safe beside me, and drove toward whatever came next. Behind me, the perfect Thompson family facade began to crumble. 3 days after Ethan's article hit, I found Emily waiting outside my tiny studio apartment. She held a copy of the magazine, my grandmother's designs splashed across the pages under my name. You could have told me, she said quietly. About Grandma. About everything. I unlocked my door, letting her follow me inside. My walls were covered with new designs, my own this time, inspired by but not copying my grandmother's work. Would you have listened? I asked, dropping my keys on the counter. Or would you have run straight to Dr. Whitaker like always? Emily flinched. He's threatening to pull my fellowship. Of course he is. I laughed bitterly. Can't have another Thompson woman stepping out of line, can he? Riley, please. Emily's voice cracked. The university's board is investigating his past decisions. Dad's tenure review is next month. Mom's barely leaving the house. You've destroyed everything. I destroyed nothing. I turned to face her. They did this. All of it. Every time they buried someone's dreams for their precious reputation. Is that what this is about? Revenge. It's about truth. Justice. For Grandma, for me, for who? Emily stepped closer. Because right now, it looks like you're just burning everything down without caring who gets hurt. My phone buzzed. Ethan. Whitaker's lawyers demanding a retraction. Claims you stole intellectual property. My hands started shaking. He can't do that. Those designs were never published. But they were submitted to the university. Emily cut in. Under Grandma's name. Which means, technically, they own them. The realization hit like ice water. That's why he buried them in the first place. Riley. Emily reached for my hand. Come home. We can fix this. Dr. Whitaker said if you publicly apologize. I yanked away. So, that's why you're really here? To save the family name again. To save you. Emily's composure finally cracked. You think you're the only one who felt trapped? Who wanted something different? But I learned to work within the system, to change things gradually. You learn to comply, I spat. To be their perfect daughter while I got pushed aside. And look where your rebellion got you. She gestured around my small apartment. No family, no career prospects, and now potential legal trouble. Was it worth it? My phone buzzed again. Sarah from EcoVision. Need to talk about your position given recent developments. The walls seemed to close in. Everything I'd built, everything I'd fought for, crumbling because I'd underestimated the system I was fighting against. Get out, I whispered. Riley, get out. I grabbed the magazine, ripping it in half. Go back to your perfect life and your precious mentor. Tell them they win. Emily paused at the door. You know what's ironic? Your designs, your real ones, not grandma's, they're brilliant. You could have succeeded on your own merit. Instead, you let revenge poison everything. She left, closing the door softly behind her. Through my window, I could see her wiping tears as she walked to her car. My phone buzzed one last time, Mrs. Collins. Come over, dear. There's something about your grandmother you need to know. Something I should have told you sooner. I slumped against the wall, surrounded by my torn dreams and shattered plans. The worst part wasn't losing everything, it was realizing Emily might be right. In trying to right past wrongs, I'd become exactly what I hated. Someone who destroyed others to get ahead. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the university buildings. Somewhere in those halls, Dr. Whitaker was probably celebrating his victory. My parents were likely planning damage control. And Emily was caught in the middle, just like I'd always been. Mrs. Collins texted again. It's about the real reason your grandmother left. And why Whitaker's so afraid of her designs being public. I stared at the message, too numb to respond. I'd wanted justice, but all I'd gotten was chaos. Now I had to decide, keep fighting a losing battle, or admit defeat and try to salvage what was left of my life. The torn magazine pages scattered across my floor like broken promises. Mrs. Collins' revelation about my grandmother still echoed in my head as I walked into EcoVision's launch event. The truth about Dr. Whitaker's past wasn't just ammunition, it was dynamite. Ready. Ethan squeezed my hand, camera ready. The showroom gleamed with my designs, actual ones this time, inspired by, but distinct from my grandmother's work. He's here. Emily's text flashed on my phone. My sister had chosen her side, finally. Not the one anyone expected. Dr. Whitaker's voice cut through the crowd. Quite the achievement, taking credit for another's work. He stood by my centerpiece design, a sustainable housing model that could revolutionize low-income housing. Though I suppose intellectual theft runs in the family. The room quieted. Cameras turned our way. Funny you should mention theft, Charles. I stepped forward, grandmother's journal in hand. Let's talk about the real reason you buried her designs 30 years ago. His smile flickered. Those designs belonged to the university. Because you falsified the submission dates. Emily emerged from the crowd, holding a stack of documents. After she discovered your research fraud. Whitaker's face reddened. Dr. Thompson, control your daughters. They don't need controlling. Dad's voice surprised everyone. He stood near the entrance, looking smaller somehow, more human. They need to be heard. Finally, I opened the journal to its last entry. Grandma found evidence that you falsified environmental impact data for the university's expansion projects. The same projects her sustainable designs would have made unnecessary. Ridiculous, Whitaker sputtered. Margaret, Harold, are you going to allow this spectacle? Mom stepped forward, but her usual authority was gone. Did you really think we wouldn't find out? That Riley's investigation wouldn't uncover everything. Investigation. His eyes darted between us. Why do you think I published those designs? I moved closer. We needed you to react exactly as you did, with legal threats that would force the university board to review all related documents. Emily held up her phone. Including your buried reports from 1992. The ones Grandma was about to expose before you forced her out. The crowd murmured. Cameras flashed. Whitaker's facade cracked. You have no proof. Actually, Ethan stepped forward. We have your own words. Every threatening letter you sent her, every falsified report. Riley's article wasn't just about the designs, it was bait. And you bit, I finished. Just like you did with Grandma. Only this time, there's nowhere to bury the truth. Whitaker lunged for the journal. I stepped back, but he grabbed my arm. You ungrateful little. Dad moved faster than I'd ever seen him. Take your hands off my daughter. Security approached as Whitaker's grip loosened. His carefully constructed world crumbled around him. The board will have your complete investigation report tomorrow, Emily said. Along with my resignation from the fellowship, I'm pursuing independent research, focusing on sustainable technology. I stared at my sister, seeing her clearly for the first time in years. Riley, Mom stepped forward, her voice breaking. Your designs, your real ones, they're extraordinary. We should have seen it sooner. The security team escorted a protesting Whitaker out. Cameras followed, capturing his disgrace.
I turned to my family.
This was never about revenge. It was about truth, about making things right. No, Dad said quietly. It was about being heard, something we forgot to do a long time ago. The crowd dispersed, leaving us in a room full of possibilities. My designs, Emily's new path, our family's chance at healing. Mrs. Collins appeared at my side. Your grandmother would be proud. Not because you exposed him, but because you did it your way, with creativity and purpose. I looked around at my work, at the family I thought I'd lost, at the future I'd fought to create. Think it's too late to add her name to these designs? Not as the creator, but as the inspiration. Emily smiled. It's never too late to tell the truth. Outside, reporters gathered, hungry for the story. But the real story wasn't in the scandal or the revenge. It was in the healing that came after, in the bridges rebuilt from the ashes of what we'd burned down. 6 months after Whitaker's downfall, I stood in my grandmother's restored study, running my fingers along the spines of her newly uncovered journals. The university's investigation had revealed more than justice fraud. It had unearthed an entire archive of her work, hidden away in storage for decades. Found something interesting? Emily asked, carrying in another box of recovered papers. Everything she created is interesting. I opened a journal, smiling at the familiar sketches. Hard to believe they kept all this buried for so long. Speaking of buried, Emily pulled out an envelope. Dad found this in Whitaker's office during the clean-out. It's addressed to you. The letter was dated the day before our grandmother died. My hands trembled as I opened it. What does it say? Emily asked. I read aloud. My dearest Riley, by now you'll have discovered the truth about your gift. It's not just creativity, it's vision. The ability to see beyond what is to what could be. They'll try to bury it, just as they did mine. Don't let them. But remember, revenge destroys, while creation builds. Tose wiseli. Love, Grandma. The sound of cars pulling up outside drew us to the window. Mom and Dad were arriving for the dedication ceremony, the university's new Sustainable Design Center, built using my grandmother's original concepts and my modern adaptations. Ready. Ethan appeared in the doorway, camera in hand as always. They're waiting for the keynote speaker. I tucked the letter into my jacket pocket. Almost. Mrs. Collins joined us, looking frail but determined. Your grandmother gave me something to hold on to years ago. Said I'd know when it was time.
She handed me a small key.
The bottom drawer of her desk. She always said the best revenge is living well. The drawer contained a single notebook, its pages filled with designs far ahead of their time. But it was the dedication that caught my eye. To my granddaughters, one who will break the mold, and one who will rebuild it, together. Emily read over my shoulder, her breath catching. She knew. Somehow she knew we'd end up here. Different paths, same destination. I said, thinking of our journey. Emily's research now focused on implementing sustainable technology, while my designs made it accessible to everyone. Outside, the ceremony crowd grew. Mom was greeting guests, her pride no longer wrapped in academic prestige, but in genuine accomplishment. Dad stood examining the building's solar features, finally seeing the beauty and innovation that crossed boundaries. You never did tell me, Emily said quietly. When did you figure out Whitaker's whole scheme? I didn't. I smiled at Mrs. Collins.
She did.
Turns out Grandma told her everything before she died. We just needed the right moment and the right bait to expose it. And now? Ethan asked, lowering his camera. I looked around the study, at the family we'd rebuilt from the ashes of secrets and silence, at the legacy we'd uncovered, and the future we were creating. Now we build something new. I pulled out my latest designs, a community center that combined Emily's research with my sustainable concepts. Together this time. The ceremony began outside, but we lingered a moment longer in the study. Emily picked up one of Grandma's journals, then handed me her fellowship resignation letter, still unopened. Want to do the honors? She asked. I tore it in half, letting the pieces fall like confetti. To new beginnings. Mrs. Collins smiled knowingly. Your grandmother always said the best stories don't end. They transform. We walked out together into the bright afternoon sun, where the crowd waited for a speech about innovation and sustainability. But they'd get something more, a story about family, about healing, about finding strength in our differences. I felt Grandma's letter against my heart as I took the podium. Behind me stood the future she'd imagined, and we'd finally brought to life. Not through revenge or destruction, but through creation and truth. Sometimes the best way to honor the past isn't to avenge it, but to build something better from its foundations.